The hum of the servers was my lullaby, a constant, low thrum against the late-night quiet of the firm. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of my desk lamp, performing their slow, silent ballet. It was past 2, the city outside a muted whisper, but here, within the fortress of glass and steel, the numbers still screamed for attention. I, Thomas, was their confessor, their meticulous interpreter. Every decimal point, every ledger entry, a tiny piece of a vast, intricate puzzle I was compelled to solve. My life was order, precision. The lines on my spreadsheets were straighter than any ruler could draw, the columns aligned with a mathematician's zeal. Forensic accounting wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a sanctuary from the chaotic unpredictability of the world. I sought truth in figures, justice in balanced equations. And tonight, I was sifting through the sprawling financial tapestry of Meridian Global, one of the firm's most prestigious clients, a behemoth of international trade and investment. A routine audit, they had called it, a mere formality. I had been tracing a series of intercompany transfers, a labyrinthine flow of capital between various subsidiaries and holding entities spread across half a dozen jurisdictions. Nothing inherently unusual for a corporation of this magnitude. My fingers moved with practiced grace across the keyboard, calling up ledgers, cross-referencing bank statements, dissecting balance sheets. Hours dissolved into the relentless rhythm of my work, each click and scroll bringing me deeper into the client's digital heart. Then, a flicker, a minor variance, almost imperceptible in the amortization schedule for a subsidiary's asset portfolio. A rounding error, perhaps, a slip of a decimal. My brow furrowed. I prided myself on catching what others missed, microscopic aberrations that hinted at larger truths. I double-checked the source document, then the corresponding entry in the general ledger. The figures, while close, did not perfectly align. A difference of exactly $2,387.42. Insignificant, by Meridian standards, a mere grain of sand on their financial beach. Yet it snagged on my internal radar. A tiny tremor of unease, like a forgotten chord struck in a silent room. My mind, a finely tuned instrument, registered the discord. I dug deeper, following the thread of that peculiar variance. It led me to a series of journal entries, all dated within a narrow 2-week window, all approved by a mid-level manager I barely recognized. The entries themselves seemed innocuous enough: consulting fees, logistical support, operational overhead. But the recipient accounts, they were not Meridian subsidiaries. They were shell corporations, newly formed with generic names that offered no clue to their true purpose. This was no rounding error. This was a deliberate obfuscation. My fingers flew, a frantic dance across the keys, pulling up corporate registrations, ownership structures, bank accounts. The more I unearthed, the less sense it made. The shell companies, each a financial ghost, shared a common characteristic: a single, obscure director, often a placeholder, with no discernible connection to Meridian Global's legitimate operations. The sums involved, while individually modest, began to accumulate, forming a steady, quiet river of capital flowing away from the main currents of Meridian's legitimate business. A cold certainty began to settle in my stomach, like a stone dropped into a still pond. This wasn't just sloppy accounting. This was an artful, complex maneuver. The kind of maneuver designed to hide, to launder. I pulled up the latest batch of logistical support payments. One particular transaction, dated just last month, stood out like a jagged shard of glass in a smooth mosaic. The payment, a rather substantial sum, was directed to a company named Azure Holdings, registered in a tax haven I knew well. But it wasn't the sum, nor the jurisdiction, that seized my attention. It was the delivery address, listed in the supporting documentation for the logistical support. My gaze sharpened, scanning the lines of text. There it was, stark against the formal corporate jargon. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The words hung in the air, divorced from logic, a rogue element in the meticulously crafted deception. A yacht marina, after midnight, and a wrong slip number. What kind of logistical support required such a bizarre, specific, and contradictory detail? It screamed of clandestine meetings, of dark waters and shadowy exchanges, a world utterly alien to the polished boardrooms and sterile data centers I inhabited. My breath hitched. The quiet hum of the servers suddenly felt menacing, a low growl. The air in my office grew heavy, thick with the unsaid, the unseen. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the distinct sensation of having stumbled upon something vast and dangerous. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. I zoomed in on the detail, rereading it several times, as if the words themselves might rearrange into something more palatable. But they remained. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. A tremor went through me, not of fear yet, but of a profound disquiet. The meticulous order of my world had just been violently disrupted by a single, absurd string of characters. My fingers, usually so steady, hovered over the save icon, then over the report function. This was protocol. This was what I was trained to do. The sheer audacity of the embedded detail, the brazenness of it, suggested a confidence, a power that transcended mere corporate fraud. This felt like the tip of an iceberg, the visible part of something monstrously larger, deeply entrenched. My eyes swept over the glowing screens, the intricate web of transactions now seeming less like a puzzle and more like a trap. What if this wasn't just an error? What if it was a test, a warning? The firm, my colleagues, the partners, would they see this as I did? Or would they see only inconvenience, a threat to a lucrative client relationship? A wave of doubt washed over me, a rare visitor in my world of certainty. Had I overreacted? Was I connecting dots that weren't meant to be connected, projecting malice where there was only incompetence? No. My gut, that quiet, unerring compass, screamed otherwise. The numbers didn't lie, not when I knew how to listen, and these numbers were singing a dirge. The routine audit had become anything but. My meticulous world had just shattered, leaving me exposed on the precipice of something far more sinister than any ledger could contain. The digital phantom of Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number, still shimmered on my screen, a cryptic beacon in a sea of meticulously balanced ledgers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a tremor running through the tips. The phrase had no business existing within the arid landscape of corporate finance. It was a misplaced brushstroke on a masterpiece of deception, too vivid, too specific to be accidental. A personal note, a coded message. The sheer audacity of its inclusion, hidden within a convoluted expense report, suggested a confidence born of impunity. My initial disbelief had curdled into a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't a mistake. It was a signature. The office hummed around me, a symphony of muted clicks and hushed phone calls, utterly oblivious to the silent storm brewing within my own cubicle. I took a deep breath, the sterile air doing little to calm the flutter in my chest. My duty was clear. I gathered the relevant documents, the anomalies flagged, the connections traced, all leading back to that bizarre, out-of-place sequence of words. My analysis was robust, my logic unassailable. This wasn't merely a discrepancy, it was a gaping wound in the firm's financial integrity. My first port of call was the senior manager, a man whose polished demeanor was as unyielding as the mahogany of his desk. His gaze, usually a quick, assessing flick, now lingered on me with an unfamiliar weight as I entered his expansive office. The scent of expensive coffee and old paper hung in the air, a familiar comfort that suddenly felt alien. "Thomas," he greeted, a practiced smile playing on his lips. "Come in. What urgent matter brings you here?" I laid out my findings, speaking with the precise cadence of a man who dealt in facts, not conjecture. I presented the convoluted transactions, the shell companies, the inexplicable cash flows. Then I pointed to the offending phrase, stark on the printed page. "This, sir, is the linchpin. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. It appears in the supplementary notes for Project Cerberus, yet bears no relevance to any known operational expenditure. Its presence, coupled with the other irregularities, suggests a diversion of funds, a clear case of." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully, unauthorized financial activity. The senior manager leaned back, his fingers steepled. His eyes, though fixed on the document, seemed to look past the words, into some distant, internal landscape. "Thomas," he began, his voice smooth as worn velvet. Your diligence is commendable, truly. But sometimes, in our pursuit of absolute clarity, we can perhaps overinterpret. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. It's an unusual phrase, I grant you, but perhaps a personal notation by a junior clerk, a mnemonic for a delivery, an internal jest. He waved a dismissive hand. We deal with thousands of transactions daily. Minor clerical oddities are not unheard of. My stomach tightened. Sir, this isn't a minor clerical oddity. It's embedded within a series of transactions that defy logical explanation, pointing to a sophisticated laundering operation. The scale, the complexity. He cut me off, his smile unwavering, but his eyes now held a glint of something colder. Thomas, I understand your enthusiasm. It's a quality we value. But sometimes, a fresh perspective can be overly zealous. Project Cerberus is a sensitive account, vital to the firm's prestige. We must maintain discretion, avoid any undue alarm that could destabilize client relations. Let's not invent phantoms where none exist. I suggest you reevaluate, perhaps focus on the more conventional metrics. Your current trajectory is excellent. We wouldn't want any misdirected efforts to derail it. The words hung in the air, silken threads weaving a subtle net of warning. Misdirected efforts. Derail it. My mind reeled. He hadn't just dismissed my findings. He had dismissed me. He had implied my professional judgment was flawed, my ambition misguided. He knew, or at least he was protecting someone who knew. I left his office, the scent of expensive coffee now tasting bitter on my tongue. The firm, my sanctuary of order and logic, suddenly felt like a labyrinth with shifting walls. I couldn't simply unsee what I had seen. My resolve, though momentarily shaken, quickly hardened. If the senior manager wouldn't listen, I would go higher. I meticulously prepared a more concise, impactful summary, stripping away all but the most damning evidence. This time, I sought an audience with the director, a figure whose presence commanded a quiet deference throughout the firm. The director's office was even more austere, the view from his window encompassing the city's sprawling expanse, an empire of glass and steel. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his gaze unwavering as I explained, again, the intricate web of deception, culminating in the Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number anomaly. When I finished, a silence descended, heavy and absolute. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished surface. Thomas, he said, his voice a low rumble, you are an exceptional talent. Your eye for detail is unmatched. That is precisely why I must be candid with you. He paused, his gaze boring into mine. The firm operates on trust, on reputation. We handle fortunes, secrets. To cast doubt, even internally, on the integrity of our operations without absolute, irrefutable proof is to risk far more than just an account. It risks the very foundation of what we do. He picked up the document, his thumb tracing the line of text. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. A curious phrase indeed. Perhaps a private joke, a code between a client and an associate. We have very high net worth individuals, Thomas, with their own peculiar ways. We do not pry into their personal affairs, especially when their business with us is otherwise impeccable. Your focus, Thomas, should remain on the clear, verifiable financial health of the firm, not on speculative interpretations of private communications. There are certain lines we simply do not cross. For the sake of the firm, and for the sake of your promising career, I urge you to understand that. The words were not a request, they were an injunction. The threat, though veiled in concern, was unmistakable. My stomach churned. The corruption wasn't just higher, it was embedded, like a parasite, deep within the firm's very structure. They weren't just dismissing my findings, they were actively protecting the source of the rot. The city lights, once a comforting tapestry, now seemed to mark me, 1,000 glittering eyes watching my solitary struggle. My hand trembled as I reopened the file, the Yacht Marina after midnight wrong slip number, now screaming its truth. It was no longer just an anomaly, it was a warning. And I, Thomas, the meticulous number cruncher, was now standing on the precipice of something far more perilous than I could have ever imagined, utterly alone. The firm's corridors, usually a hive of hushed ambition, now felt like a mausoleum. Each step I took away from the senior partner's polished office echoed with the weight of his thinly veiled warning. They weren't just dismissing my findings, they were actively protecting something. The thought was a cold stone in my gut, hardening into a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of ordered solitude, transformed into a clandestine command center. The blue glow of my monitors became my moon, casting long shadows across stacks of printouts and hastily scribbled notes. I worked in silence, the only sound the rhythmic tap of my keyboard, a counterpoint to the anxious thrum of my own pulse. Forget the firm's resources, their channels were poisoned. I would forge my own path through this labyrinth, armed only with my intellect and a stubborn refusal to let the truth remain buried. I revisited the initial data, not with the firm's filters, but with a fresh, untainted lens. The spreadsheets, once a source of professional pride, now felt like a cryptic map. I hunted for the anomalies, not the gaping chasms, but the subtle ripples in the financial currents. My initial report had focused on the larger, more obvious discrepancies, the movements that screamed laundering. It began with a series of minor disbursements, hundreds of small payments flagged as consulting fees or software licenses to a string of obscure shell companies. Individually, they were negligible, easily dismissed in a firm of our scale. But when I cross-referenced their payment dates, their amounts, and the names of the recipient entities, a faint pattern shimmered into view. Each company, seemingly independent, shared a peculiar trait. Their registered addresses were all variations of the same post office box number in a district known more for its derelict warehouses than its bustling commerce. My breath hitched. This wasn't just sloppy. It was meticulously designed to be overlooked. 1,000 tiny streams feeding a hidden river. I traced the flow, mapping the web of connections on a sprawling whiteboard, lines of red marker connecting names to dates, dates to amounts, amounts to a single, insidious nexus. The sophistication of the scheme began to reveal itself, a testament to the architect's foresight. This wasn't a crude smash and grab. It was an intricate dance of obfuscation, designed to bleed money dry without ever drawing a single shout. Then, a particularly jarring detail surfaced. One of the shell companies, Oceanic Ventures Limited, ostensibly a maritime consulting firm, showed disproportionately large quarterly expenditures, not for consulting, but for docking fees and vessel upkeep. My brow furrowed. A consulting firm, by definition, consults. It doesn't typically incur the kind of expenses usually associated with owning a fleet of luxury yachts. Yet, according to its sparse online presence, Oceanic Ventures Limited claimed no vessels, no physical assets beyond a single, generic office suite in a forgotten industrial park. Wait, that doesn't add up, I murmured to the empty room, the words tasting like ash. The numbers were screaming, though no one else seemed to hear. A maritime consulting firm with no vessels but colossal docking fees. It was a financial phantom limb, a limb that was clearly attached to something very real and very expensive. My gut tightened. This was the thread. This was the physical manifestation of the paper trail. A tremor of self-doubt ran through me. There was I chasing ghosts. There was the pressure making me see connections where none existed. The discrepancy was too stark, too deliberate. The only way to reconcile it was to assume Oceanic Ventures Limited. They wasn't just consulting. It was funding something large and tangible, under a carefully constructed veil of legitimacy. The address listed for Oceanic Ventures Limited, S purported maritime operations base, was a single slip number at a sprawling, private yacht marina. But the compulsion to see, to confirm, was a powerful current pulling me forward. The drive was a blur of streetlights and rising tension. The city receded, giving way to the hushed, exclusive enclave of the marina. The air was cool, carrying the briny scent of the ocean and the faint hum of distant generators. I was no detective, no spy, just an accountant with a flashlight and a gnawing curiosity. I navigated the labyrinthine docks, the polished planks gleaming faintly under the distant security lights. The names of the yachts, etched in elegant script, spoke of immense wealth and lives far removed from my own. My eyes scanned the illuminated signs, searching for the number that had haunted my screens for days. I found it. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The plaque was weathered, the paint peeling, the number faded. Slip B23. But where the gleaming, opulent vessel should have been, there was only empty water, a vacant space between two smaller, modest cruisers. My stomach dropped. Had I been wrong? Had my intricate web of connections unraveled into nothing but a paranoid fantasy? Then, my gaze drifted past the empty slip, catching on something that shimmered subtly in the periphery. Not a vessel, but a different kind of numbering system, almost hidden. A small, secondary plaque, bolted low to the piling just beyond B23, read Private Docking Slip 23A. And nestled within that obscured berth, eclipsing the modest cruisers on either side, was a yacht, not merely large, but gargantuan. It bore no visible name, no flag, just an unblinking array of surveillance cameras that seemed to follow my every hesitant movement. This was no ordinary pleasure craft. This was a fortress. The true scale of their operations, I realized with a sickening lurch, was far grander and far more perilous than I had ever dared to imagine. The corruption wasn't just higher. It was embedded like a parasite, deep within the firm's very structure, a malignancy I now knew too intimately. The air, once crisp with corporate efficiency, now carried a faint metallic tang of dread, clinging to my clothes, my skin, a scent only I could discern. That evening, the familiar path home felt elongated, each shadow deepening, each street lamp casting a pool of light that offered no solace. My gaze snagged on the faint flicker of a dashboard light. Then it was gone. A trick of tired eyes, perhaps, a mind overwrought. I moved through the rooms, a phantom in my own life, checking locks, peering through curtains. Nothing was disturbed, yet everything felt askew. A book on my bedside table, which I distinctly remembered closing, lay open, face down. A minor displacement, easily explained by a draft, a clumsy hand. Yet my fingers traced the spine, a tremor running through me. They had been here. Or had I simply forgotten? The insidious doubt was a new enemy, as potent as any unseen adversary. The next few days blurred into a pattern of heightened awareness. The same sedan, or one remarkably similar, materialized and vanished from my rearview mirror with an almost theatrical precision. A colleague, usually aloof, suddenly engaged me in casual conversation, his questions too pointed, too eager about my recent projects, his eyes lingering a fraction too long on my expressions. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, my every move catalogued, my thoughts dissected. The pressure was a slow, deliberate squeeze, designed not to break me instantly, but to erode my resolve, to make me question the very ground beneath my feet. I couldn't stop. The numbers, the discrepancies, they gnawed at me, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The senior partner's threat had only solidified my conviction. I shifted my work, moving my clandestine investigation from my office to the quiet solitude of my study at home, late into the night. My old laptop, slow and humming, became my confidante. I delved deeper into the shell companies, tracing their opaque ownership structures, cross-referencing obscure shipping manifests with the firm's internal ledgers, searching for the next hidden thread. The money, a river of illicit wealth, flowed through a complex network of legal fronts, eventually pooling in offshore accounts, then seemingly vanishing into thin air. But the destination of those funds, the ultimate asset they transformed into, remained elusive. One particular transaction, a massive capital outlay disguised as logistics and storage solutions, led me down a rabbit hole of maritime records. It pointed to a specific holding company, a ghost entity, with a registered address that seemed incongruous with its supposed operations. A yacht marina, not a sprawling industrial port, but a place for leisure craft. It felt like a deliberate misdirection, a taunt in the data. Yet, it was the only tangible lead that wasn't a dead end. I found myself driving towards the coast, the city lights receding into a distant shimmer. The air grew cooler, carrying the briny scent of the sea. It was well past midnight when I arrived at the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The vast expanse of the marina was a tapestry of dark water and barbing vessels, their masts piercing the Inkai sky like skeletal fingers. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against hulls and the distant cry of a gull. I navigated the labyrinthine walkways, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the composite decking. But when I finally reached the section, scanning the brass plates, 17B was conspicuously absent. Instead, there was 17A, then a wide, empty gap, then 17C. My eyes swept the surrounding berths. Most held sleek, gleaming yachts, their covers drawn tight. But the berth where 17B should have been, the empty space, felt wrong. The barlards here were scuffed, scored with deeper gouges than elsewhere. And then I saw it, almost invisible in the gloom, etched roughly into the concrete of the empty berth's edge. A stylized crane symbol, accompanied by a faded, blocky initial, K. It wasn't marine-related. It was an industrial mark. A sudden shift in the air, a subtle displacement of the quiet, made me freeze. I wasn't alone. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound. They simply stood there, perhaps 20 yards away, a silhouette against the faint glow of the distant city, watching me. There was no aggression in their stance, no overt threat, just an unnerving stillness, an absolute certainty of presence. It was the same silent judgment I'd felt from the senior partner, amplified, stripped of its corporate veneer. My breath hitched. My heart, against my will, began to hammer a frantic rhythm. I felt utterly exposed, a trespasser caught in the beam of a hidden spotlight. The wrong slip number, the empty berth, the industrial mark, it all clicked into place with a sickening thud. I wasn't meant to find a yacht. I was meant to find this. This was a covert loading dock, a transit point for something far removed from pleasure cruising, and the K, it was too specific, too deliberate a detail to be random. It had to be a company initial or perhaps a person. The figure took a single, slow step forward. The movement was barely perceptible, yet it felt like a declaration. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was an acknowledgement. They knew I was here. They knew what I was looking for, and they wanted me to know they knew. What was I doing? I was an accountant, not an operative in some clandestine war. My wife, my child. The image of their faces flashed before me, innocent and vulnerable. The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth, making me doubt the very foundations of my resolve. But beneath the fear, a different current stirred. The K, the industrial crane, the deliberate misdirection of the yacht marina. It was all a puzzle, a taunt. They wanted me to back off, but they had also, inadvertently, given me a new piece of the truth. The money wasn't just vanishing. It was being transformed, moved, perhaps even manufactured, right under the nose of unsuspecting authorities, using places like this as a discreet conduit. The anger, sharp and clear, began to eclipse the fear. I might be out of my depth, but I wasn't out of the fight. Not yet. I would find out what K stood for. The corruption wasn't just higher. It was embedded like a parasite, deep within the firm's very structure, its tendrils reaching, I now understood, far beyond the ledger books. The air outside, though cool and clean, offered no solace. It felt thinner, harder to draw into my lungs, as if the city itself conspired to suffocate the truth. I drove, the hum of the engine a dull counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my thoughts. Each passing streetlight cast fleeting shadows that seemed to writhe, morphing into the faces of those who stood to lose, or those who stood to gain. My mind, usually a precise instrument of logic, was a storm of conjecture, battling the senior partner's placid smile, his eyes that held the chill of a winter lake. The phrase clung to me, a burr on my psyche. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize, to tell myself it was a desperate bluff from a man protecting his empire. It was not my career I feared losing. It was the quiet sanctity of my home, the laughter that filled its rooms, the gentle presence of my wife, the boundless energy of my daughter. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson as I navigated the familiar route. My wife had mentioned taking our daughter out, a special treat. An evening on the water, perhaps a small boat ride with a friend who owned a vessel. The thought, usually a balm, now pricked at me with a nascent unease. The marina, a place of leisure and gentle waves, suddenly felt like a stage set for something else. I found myself not turning towards home, but towards the coast, drawn by an instinct I couldn't name. A forensic accountant's compulsion, perhaps, to tie up loose ends, even when the world around him unraveled. The yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The phrase echoed in my mind as my headlights cut through the gloom. Masts swayed gently against a sky dusted with distant stars. I parked the car a discreet distance away, the gravel crunching under my tires like a guilty confession. But a glint of reflective material caught my eye, a shimmering thread of silver at slip 23, the wrong slip number, a few berths down. It was a familiar ribbon, the kind my daughter loved to weave into her hair. My breath hitched. He had worn one just like it this morning. A misplaced item, perhaps, from a child's playful abandon. My mind scrambled for a benign explanation. Then my phone vibrated, a sudden jarring chime in the quiet expanse of the marina. It was my wife. His voice, usually a melody of calm, was fractured, edged with a brittle panic I'd never heard. "Thomas, thank God, where are you?" I'm at the marina. What is it?" "Oh, Thomas." It was so strange. We were waiting at the usual slip, but then a man, he said he was from the marina, he told us our friend's boat had moved to slip 23. Said there was a last-minute change. Our eyes darted to the boat barbing gently at slip 23. It was not our friend's vessel. It was a smaller, older craft, its paint peeling, its lines unfamiliar. "What happened?" I urged, my voice a strained rasp. "We went there. It looked a bit neglected, but the man insisted. He said our friend was just getting it ready. Our daughter, he was so excited she ran ahead. She almost stepped on board, but then I smelled it. A terrible, strong smell, like gas, and I saw something. A pipe, it looked like it had been deliberately loosened. Just barely, but enough. If the engine had started. A gas leak, a loosened pipe, a deliberate misdirection to the wrong slip number, and my daughter running ahead so close to the brink. The man, I pressed. What did he look like? I don't know, he just disappeared when I screamed and pulled our daughter back. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was a message, etched in the near miss of my daughter's laughter, in the noxious scent of gas, in the precise, calculated redirection to slip 23. I walked towards the boat, my steps heavy, each one an acknowledgement of a boundary crossed. On the deck, near where the loosened pipe lay, almost hidden by a coil of rope, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was a common enough trinket, sold in tourist shops. But this one had a faint, almost invisible, scratch on its wing, a detail I remembered from a photograph, a background item in a picture of a known associate of the firm's shadier clients. The illusion of safety, a fragile glass shield I'd clung to, shattered with a deafening internal crack. My fear, a gnawing beast, transformed. It coalesced into a hard, diamond-sharp point of resolve. They had touched my family. They had threatened the very core of my existence. The cautious number cruncher, the meticulous forensic accountant, was gone. I would not just expose them, I would dismantle them, piece by agonizing piece, no matter the cost. This was no longer just about numbers. This was about survival. This was about vengeance. And they had just awakened the predator. The acrid scent of gas, still clinging to the edges of my memory, was a phantom limb of fear. It tightened around my throat, a silent warning that echoed the senior partner's chilling pronouncement. A darkness you cannot comprehend. That darkness had pressed its face against my daughter's window, its breath a poisonous vapor. It was no random act, no mere vandalism. It was a message, scrawled in the near miss of a child's laughter, in the precise, calculated redirection of a gas line. And it screamed that I was alone, exposed, a single candle against a storm. The meticulous order of my mind, once a fortress, now felt like a glass house. Every number, every ledger entry I had painstakingly untangled, seemed to shimmer with a new, terrifying luminescence. The web was vaster than I had dared to imagine, its threads reaching into places I hadn't even considered. I was an accountant, a keeper of balances, not a warrior. Yet, a resolve, hard and cold as steel, had begun to forge itself within me. I could not fight this alone. The realization settled, heavy and undeniable, pushing me towards a path I had sworn I would never tread again. The former colleague. He had been a mentor once, sharp-witted and fiercely principled, until the currents of corporate ambition and something far more sinister had swept him away, leaving him adrift, disgraced, but unbowed. A burner phone, purchased from a faceless vending machine in a forgotten corner of the city, became my lifeline. My hands, usually steady as I balanced columns of figures, trembled slightly as I typed the cryptic message, a coded phrase only he would understand, hinting at a shared past and a present danger. The reply came hours later, equally terse, suggesting a place and time. Yacht Marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The specific anomaly of the slip number was a signature, a nod to his own peculiar brand of caution. The night air at the marina was a damp embrace, carrying the metallic tang of salt and diesel, the low groan of fiberglass against pilings. A thin crescent moon, a sliver of bone, cast just enough light to delineate the skeletal masts against the indigo sky. His face, etched with the years of his exile, was a roadmap of cynicism and weariness. His eyes, however, still held that familiar spark of intelligence, now banked by a profound sadness. "Thomas," he said, his voice a low rasp, barely audible above the creak of rigging. "You're a ghost I didn't expect to see." "And you," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended, "are exactly where I hoped to find you." He offered no greeting, no handshake, just a slow, appraising look that seemed to strip away my composure. "You're in deep, aren't you? Deeper than I ever got." I nodded, the word a bitter taste. "The firm, it's not just dirty, it's a conduit for something immense, money laundering on a scale that defies belief, and they know I've seen it." He pushed off the railing, moving closer, his gaze intense. "The syndicate. I warned them. I saw the patterns, the shell corporations, the phantom transactions that vanished into thin air. They called me paranoid, unstable. They ripped my life apart." He paused, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "What have you found?" I laid out what I could, not everything, but enough. The intricate web of shell companies, the inexplicable surges in specific, obscure commodities, the sudden wealth of individuals who should have been mere cogs. I spoke of the hidden accounts, the digital ghost trails I had meticulously followed. "It's not just finance, Thomas," he interrupted, his voice hushed, urgent. "That's where it starts, yes, the blood flowing through the veins, but their heart, their true power, it's in logistics, the physical movement, the warehousing, the docks, the transport routes. They don't just move money, they move things. Anything of value, anything that can be smuggled, anything that can be hidden in plain sight. From illicit goods to logistics, it made a terrifying kind of sense. The financial trails were just the smoke screen for the tangible, brutal reality of their operations, but the capital flows were inverted, money going in, not out, for services never rendered. "Rotterdam," he mused, a faraway look in his eyes. "That name, it rings a bell. A colleague of mine, before I was purged, he was looking into something similar. Said he found irregularities with shipping manifests, containers arriving empty or departing with different cargo than declared. He called it the phantom freight. He said it pointed to a network of ghost ports, not physical places, but a system of rerouting and relabeling that made tracking impossible. Ghost ports. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. It was a perfect metaphor for the unseen, untraceable nature of their enterprise. Then, a subtle shift in his demeanor caught my attention. As he spoke of the phantom freight, his eyes darted quickly, almost imperceptibly, towards the dark water, then back to me. A slight clench of his jaw. Was it fear or something else? He'd always been a master of poker faces, but this felt different, too practiced. He mentioned the colleague who investigated the phantom freight, but the details were vague, almost deliberately so. He said the colleague disappeared. But I remembered a rumor, years ago, that the same colleague had simply retired early, bought a vineyard in Tuscany. Wait, that doesn't add up, I thought, a tiny seed of doubt taking root in the fertile ground of my paranoia. Had the former colleague embellished the story to emphasize the danger, to test my resolve, or to obscure something else entirely? A distant splash, a sudden, sharp crackle of static from a nearby boat's radio made us both stiffen. We exchanged a quick, knowing glance. They make them disappear. Completely. My family. A target's now, too. The warning hit me like a physical blow, though I already knew it. "I need help," I confessed, the words tasting like ash. "I need someone to help me expose this, publicly, before they erase me and everything I care about." He looked at me for a long moment, the weariness in his eyes deepening, then he nodded slowly. "I can't fight them directly anymore. I have nothing left to lose, but also nothing left to gain. But I know people. People who still believe in truth. People who dig. An investigative journalist, tenacious as a pit viper. She owes me a favor, a big one. A sliver of hope, fragile but real, pierced through the gloom. An unlikely ally indeed. The world hadn't shrunk, it had merely shifted, revealing new, treacherous pathways. Give me a way to reach her, I answered, my voice steadier now, my determination hardening. He scribbled a name and a burner email on a small, torn piece of paper, pressing it into my hand. His fingers brushed mine. It consumes everything it touches. As I walked away from the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number, the cold wind biting at my exposed skin, the words ghost ports and phantom freight echoed in my mind, intertwining with the memory of the gas leak. The world had just become infinitely larger, infinitely more dangerous. But I was no longer entirely alone. The burden was still immense, but now perhaps I had a chance. A very small chance, but a chance nonetheless. The biting wind, a relentless sculptor of the night, chased me from the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. Each gust seemed to whisper the chilling refrain of ghost ports and phantom freight, a grim chorus that now accompanied every shadow, every creak of the aging dark. My mind, usually a fortress of figures and precise calculations, felt like a storm-tossed vessel, listing under the weight of an invisible cargo. The memory of the gas leak, a silent, creeping menace, now seemed a gentle precursor to this newfound, palpable dread. The world had indeed become infinitely larger, infinitely more dangerous. I walked with purpose, though my destination was a blur. The rhythmic slap of water against hulls was a monotonous pulse, a heartbeat of the deep. My footsteps, usually light and quick, felt heavy, each one an echo of the fear blossoming in my gut. I kept to the periphery, the flickering amber glow of distant security lights offering little comfort. The air was thick, with the scent of brine and diesel, a familiar aroma that now held a metallic tang, like the taste of impending doom. It was the absence of sound that first pricked my awareness. The marina, usually bustling even at this hour with the late-night revelers and early-morning workers, had fallen into an unnatural quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My internal alarm, usually reserved for misaligned ledger entries, screamed. Nothing. Just the sway of a rope, the gentle barb of a forgotten boy. My breath hitched. Was it paranoia, a phantom limb of my overstressed mind? Then, a flicker of movement, deeper in the labyrinth of darks, between a sleek cruiser and a hulking fishing trawler. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. I quickened my pace, turning away, pretending I hadn't seen, hadn't noticed. My professional instincts, honed over years of detecting hidden discrepancies, now applied to the human landscape. I tried to blend, to appear innocuous, just another late-night wanderer. A hand, gloved and impassably strong, clamped over my mouth from behind, simultaneously twisting my arm into a painful lark. A primal gasp was stifled. The scent of stale tobacco and something acrid, metallic, filled my nostrils. My vision narrowed, the world tilting precariously. This wasn't a warning. This was an ending. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. I wasn't built for this. I was a man of ledgers, of quiet calculations, not brutal grappling. But the instinct for survival, dormant until now, surged. I thrashed, a wild, uncoordinated burst of energy. My elbow connected with something solid, a rib, perhaps, and the grip on my arm loosened, just for a fraction of a second. I bucked, twisting violently, my heels scraping against the dark's rough timber. The attacker, taken by surprise, stumbled back a step. It was enough. My mouth was free. I let out a choked cry, more of a grunt, and lunged forward, not towards escape, but simply away from the suffocating presence. The impact jarred me, sending a jolt of pain through my arm, but it also propelled me further off balance. As I stumbled, my hand instinctively reached out, clawing for purchase. My fingers brushed against a jacket pocket, on the attacker's receding form. There was a faint bulge, and in the chaos of the moment, my fingers snagged something small, hard, and metallic. It wasn't intentional, merely a desperate, flailing grasp. As the attacker regained his footing and lunged again, I twisted, a desperate, clumsy pirouette. The small object, whatever it was now clenched in my palm. I scrambled, half crawling, half running, ducking under the low railing of a dark sailboat. The attacker cursed, his heavy footsteps thudding on the wooden planks. I could hear him, feel his presence looming. Panic, raw and visceral, threatened to consume me. Through the narrow gap between the sailboat and the next vessel, I saw a sliver of open water. Desperation lent me a strange strength. Without a second thought, I plunged, a clumsy, splashing dive into the icy embrace of the marina, but it also offered a strange clarity. The water muffled the sounds of pursuit, granting me a precious few seconds of disorientation. I surfaced, gasping, my teeth chattering, the frigid water seeping into my clothes, weighing me down. The distinctive scent of diesel was overpowering now. I could hear the attacker's frustrated shouts from above, the heavy thud of his boots as he searched the dark. I swam silently, slowly, using the moored boats as cover, pushing myself along their slimy hulls. My fingers, still clenched around the metallic object, a small, oddly shaped USB drive, felt numb. It was heavier than it looked, intricately crafted, with a unique, almost alien symbol etched into its casing. It felt like a shard of the very conspiracy I was fighting, wrenched from its source. An undeniable piece of evidence, secured in the most terrifying way imaginable. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed in protest. I found a secluded, overgrown patch of reeds on the far side of the marina, away from the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number proper. My meticulous world, once defined by orderly columns and verifiable facts, had shattered. The veiled threats, the gas leak, the obstruction, they were all preamble. This was the true confrontation. It was a tangible link, a physical manifestation of the danger. I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to my office. My life, as I knew it, had ended on that dock. The thought, stark and terrifying, settled deep within me. There was no going back, no safe harbor. I had to disappear, to become as elusive as the ghost ports I'd uncovered. The numbers had led me to this precipice, and now they demanded I leap. I was no longer just investigating. I was on the run, and the only way to survive was to go further underground than I had ever imagined possible. The chill of the night air, once a mere physical sensation, now felt like a shroud woven from the words, "Thomas, we know." It wasn't the impact of the struggle that lingered, but that quiet, precise utterance, a whisper of recognition that had burrowed deep beneath my ribs. My breath still hitched, a ragged thing caught in the aftermath of a desperate, undignified scramble. I had managed to break free, a flailing tangle of limbs and sheer terror, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys behind the firm, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. They hadn't pursued. They hadn't needed to. The following morning dawned not with the usual gentle grey light, but with a premonition of storm. My phone, usually a silent companion until my first coffee, vibrated with an urgency that spoke of ill tidings. The superior requires your immediate presence. A voice, clipped and devoid of its usual pleasantries, informed me, "Do not be late." The firm's upper floors, usually a hushed cathedral of commerce. The knowing glances of colleagues felt like tiny daggers. In the opulent office of the superior, the air was thick, heavy with unspoken accusations. The superior sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his face a mask of disappointment. Beside him, a stranger, a woman with eyes like chips of ice, introduced herself as the firm's legal counsel. "Thomas," the superior began, his voice surprisingly soft, a velvet hammer, "we have uncovered irregularities." The phrase hung in the air, a bell tolling my doom. The legal counsel slid a thick folder across the table towards me. Inside, a meticulously arranged collection of documents, emails, and transaction logs, fictitious shell companies with names subtly twisted from those I had genuinely investigated. Emails, crafted with uncanny mimicry of my own professional cadence, detailing offshore transfers, instructions for data exfiltration, and even a markup of a rival firm's proprietary client list. It was all there, damning and undeniable, yet utterly false. "These," the legal counsel stated, her voice flat, to a sophisticated scheme of corporate espionage and embezzlement. "The funds diverted are substantial. The access granted to these entities appears to have originated from your terminal, Thomas. My own terminal, the one I had used to uncover their scheme, a setup. The superior side, a theatrical sound that grated on my raw nerves. We understand this must be difficult, Thomas, but the evidence is compelling. My access has been revoked. Effective immediately. I am suspended pending a full internal and external investigation. We advise I to seek legal counsel. The words struck me like physical blows. Suspended, revoked. The polished office, the familiar faces, all morphed into a hostile landscape. My world, built on order and logic, crumbled around me. I tried to argue to point out the inconsistencies, the impossible timings, but their faces were set, their minds closed. The superior averted his gaze, a gesture of finality. We regret this, Thomas. I walked out of that building a ghost, my security pass already deactivated, refusing to grant me passage. The electronic click of the lock felt like a prison door slamming shut. My attempts to call a trusted colleague, a man who had often shared late-night coffee with me over complex spreadsheets, went unanswered or were met with polite, icy refusals. I'm sorry, Thomas. I've been advised not to discuss ongoing investigations. The words were always the same, rehearsed, impersonal. My own home, usually a sanctuary, felt tainted. The thought of facing my wife, of explaining this monstrous lie, twisted my gut. How could I protect her if I couldn't even protect myself? I saw the headlines already forming in my mind, the shame, the ruin. I couldn't drag her into this mire. Not yet. I left a hurried, vague note, a flimsy excuse about an urgent, unexpected trip, a desperate lie to shield her from the immediate fallout. I packed a small bag, a phantom limb, my movements numb, mechanical. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of light and sound, now felt like a vast, indifferent moor. I drove for hours, the hum of the engine a dull drone against the frantic buzz in my skull. I was adrift, cut loose from every anchor. Despair, a heavy cloak, settled upon my shoulders, threatening to crush me beneath its weight. Had I been so blind, so arrogant to think I could fight ghosts? Then, a flicker, something about the wrong slip number and a package. It had meant nothing then, an oddity I'd filed away. Now, in the stark clarity of my utter ruin, it resonated, a desperate, irrational thread to pull. It was well past midnight when I found myself at the yacht marina. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel, the rhythmic slap of water against hulls a mournful dirge. I moved like a phantom myself, tracing the pathways between the moored vessels, the numbers on the slips glowing faintly in the gloom. My heart hammered, a frantic animal trapped in my chest. What was I even looking for? A phantom clue, a sign that I wasn't entirely mad. I reached the designated number, a slip where a gleaming white yacht, twice the size of its neighbors, barbed gently. Its name, emblazoned in elegant script, meant nothing to me. But then my eyes drifted to the slip beside it. The wrong slip number. And there, tucked beneath a coil of heavy rope, half hidden by a discarded canvas tarp, was a small waterproof satchel. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the cool, slick material a stark contrast to the burning heat of my skin. Inside, I found not money, not a weapon, but a single, pristine data chip, the kind used for encrypted storage. And beneath it, a folded piece of paper, thick and expensive. On it, a single, elegant symbol, a stylized serpent devouring its own tail, the same symbol I had glimpsed on a file deep within the firm's encrypted network, a file I had been unable to fully access before my system privileges were revoked. The symbol of the syndicate. This wasn't a random drop. This was a message. A deliberate plant. They wanted me to find it, but why? To incriminate me further, or was there something else? But they had also left a breadcrumb, a twisted, cruel invitation. This chip, this symbol, it didn't add up to simple embezzlement. This was deeper. This was a challenge. I was lost, yes, but not broken. The game had changed. And I, Thomas, the meticulous number cruncher, was now playing for my life. The world, once a meticulous ledger of debits and credits, had dissolved into a chaotic scrawl. My suspension, a whisper of corporate disapproval, had swelled into a roar, deafening me to all reason. They had stripped me bare, not just of my access and my title, but of the very framework that held my life upright. I had argued, pleaded with the stone-faced partners, their words like dull blades, carving away my professional existence. Their accusations, flimsy as they were, had been delivered with an unshakable finality. There was no appeal, no recourse. Just the cold, hard fact of my professional demise. The hours that followed were a blur of numb disbelief, a phantom limb ache where my career once was. I couldn't stay. The air was too thick with the scent of betrayal, the walls too resonant with unspoken threats. My family, shielded from the immediate fallout, remained my anchor, a distant, shimmering hope in the encroaching gloom. I knew I had to fight, not just for myself, but for the quiet sanctity of their lives. My feet, guided by some instinct beyond conscious thought, carried me through the city's slumbering arteries. A cryptic, half-remembered note, a fragment of an address scribbled on a discarded napkin from weeks ago, a lead I dismissed as insignificant at the time, now pulsed with a strange urgency in my memory. It spoke of a meeting, a potential contact from the periphery of the syndicate's network, someone I'd only ever heard whispered in hushed tones, someone who purportedly had a grievance of their own. The note was vague, a place and a time, but the details were obscured, almost deliberately so. I found myself at the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The air was cool, carrying the briny tang of the sea and the faint, oily scent of diesel. Moonlight, a silver sheen on the dark water, illuminated rows of silent vessels, their masts piercing the starless sky like skeletal fingers. Each gentle creak of a rope against a mast, each soft slap of water against a hull, seemed amplified in the profound quiet. Frustration, a bitter bile, rose in my throat. Had I been misled? There was this another dead end, another calculated waste of my dwindling time. My mind, stripped of the comforting logic of spreadsheets, felt exposed, vulnerable. On a vessel 3 slips down, a yacht of considerable size, a faint, rhythmic pulse of light emanated from a porthole on its lower deck. Not a steady glow, but a flicker like a faulty bulb or perhaps a deliberate signal. It repeated every 7 seconds, then paused for 20, then resumed. It was too regular to be accidental, too subtle to be obvious. My accountant's eye, honed to spot patterns in chaos, latched onto it. And then another observation. A different yacht, directly opposite the first, shared a similar, though less pronounced, characteristic. Its stern light, meant to be a steady beacon, occasionally dimmed, a momentary stutter in its luminescence, almost imperceptible. 2 anomalies, 2 deviations from the expected. My thoughts, once scattered like loose papers in a gale, began to coalesce. I remembered a peculiar line item in the ledgers, buried deep within the subsidiary accounts of a shell corporation, specialized maritime logistics maintenance and provisioning. The amounts were significant, disproportionate to the stated purpose, routed through a series of offshore entities that made tracing their ultimate destination a labyrinthine nightmare. At the time, I'd flagged it as suspicious, but lacked the definitive proof to connect it to the larger laundering scheme. Wait, that doesn't add up. Maintenance and provisioning rarely involved specific, rhythmic light patterns or flickering stern lights, especially not in the dead of night. It wasn't about the yachts themselves, but what they represented or what they facilitated. The wrong slip number wasn't a mistake. It was a filter, a test. It forced me to look beyond the immediate, to observe the periphery, to connect the dots that weren't explicitly drawn. The syndicate, I realized with a jolt that sent a tremor through me, wasn't merely shuffling digital currency across borders. They were moving physical assets, perhaps even people, under the guise of legitimate maritime operations. The logistics weren't for cargo, they were for clandestine transport. The subtle signals were a communication method, a way for their operatives to confirm readiness or convey status without leaving an electronic trail. The money laundering was not an end in itself. It was the financial artery feeding a much larger, more tangible criminal enterprise. This was the countermove. My unique accounting skills, my ability to see the hidden narratives in numbers, could expose not just the financial fraud, but the physical infrastructure supporting it. The paper trail, when combined with the subtle cues of their physical operations, would paint an undeniable picture. I needed to cross-reference the timing of these observed maritime activities with the specialized logistics expenditures. I needed to find the specific dates and times when those disproportionate payments were made and see if they correlated with any unusual vessel movements or personnel transfers at specific marinas or docks. The plan began to form, intricate and dangerous, in the quiet hum of the marina. I would need access to real-time vessel tracking data, something beyond my reach without my firm's resources. I would need to somehow acquire the manifests, the crew lists, port entry and exit records that they had undoubtedly doctored or suppressed. But more importantly, I needed to leverage the discrepancies, the gap between what their financial records claimed and what their physical movements implied. I was a forensic accountant, not a dark side detective. Could I truly pull this off? The thought, a momentary tremor of doubt, threatened to unmoor my resolve. I had no badge, no authority, no network. Only my mind, sharpened by desperation, and the faint, rhythmic flicker of a distant light. But then, the image of my family, their faces clear and precious in my mind's eye, solidified my purpose. I had nothing left to lose but my life, and everything to gain, their safety, the truth. The wrong slip number had led me to the right path. I would expose their entire operation, not just the money, but the very ships that carried their secrets. I would use their own meticulous, yet flawed, record-keeping against them. And I, Thomas, the cautious number cruncher, was ready to play. They had stripped me bare, not just of my access and my title, but of the very framework that held my life together. Yet, in that unraveling, a new resolve had forged, cold and sharp as a honed blade. I sat hunched over a borrowed laptop in a room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation, a temporary haven far removed from the sterile gleam of my former office. Lines of code, financial transactions, shell companies blooming like poisonous fungi. I had spent weeks untangling this grotesque tapestry, each thread a lie, each knot a stolen fortune. Now, I was weaving it into an undeniable narrative. My fingers, usually precise with a calculator, danced across the keyboard with a furious, almost surgical intent. I wasn't just manipulating data, I was creating a weapon. I packaged the final dossier, a compendium of illicit transfers, forged documents, and a network of complicit entities stretching across continents, all meticulously cross-referenced, time-stamped, and anonymized for public consumption. This wasn't just proof. It was a digital bomb, primed to detonate the moment it saw the light. Any misstep, any flicker of hesitation, and their lives, my life, would be extinguished, silently, irrevocably. I uploaded the encrypted package to a secure, dead-drop server. The key, however, remained with me, a physical token. My next move was a delicate ballet of trust and deception. I composed a series of coded messages, fragmented and innocuous on their own, but forming a complete instruction set for the contact. The contact, a grizzled investigative journalist I'd cautiously cultivated over the past few months, was my last, best hope. Their integrity was a solitary lighthouse in a storm of corruption. I pressed send, a final, silent prayer accompanying the digital pulse into the ether. My borrowed car, an unassuming sedan, felt like a flimsy shield against the unseen forces arrayed against me. I took circuitous routes, doubled back, and killed my headlights on deserted stretches. A phantom in the urban sprawl, my senses stretched taut. The rumble of the engine was a low hum against the frantic drumbeat of my own pulse. My destination was the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The choice was deliberate, a layer of misdirection in a game where every move was scrutinized. The official slip number, which I had subtly let slip in a controlled leak, was a decoy, a lure for any tail. The true drop point, an obscure, rarely used berth, was known only to me and the contact. The marina was a skeletal forest of masts, silhouetted against a sky bruised with city light. The rhythmic creak of ropes against metal was the only sound, a somnolent lullaby that did nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. Each step was a commitment, a point of no return. Nothing. Only the sleeping vessels, their expensive dreams rocking gently on the tide. I reached the agreed-upon location, slip number 17, not the official 23. A small, unassuming powerboat bobbed gently, its canvas cover flapping like a tired wing. There, nestled within a small, watertight magnetic case, was where the key, a tiny, anonymized USB drive, would rest. My hand brushed against the cold metal, but then something else. A faint, almost imperceptible scratch on the railing, a fresh mark that hadn't been there when I'd scouted the location just yesterday. It was too precise to be accidental, too new to be old wear. Had my covert communication been less secure than I'd imagined? Was this a sign from the contact, an acknowledgement, or was it a warning, a subtle fingerprint left by the very people I sought to expose? The syndicate moved with such ruthless efficiency. Their reach seemed boundless. Had they already anticipated my move, even this carefully constructed ruse? My carefully built confidence wavered, a flickering candle in a hurricane. I hesitated, the USB drive clutched in my palm, the weight of it suddenly immense. This entire intricate dance, every calculated risk, hinged on the absolute secrecy of this location. If it was compromised, then my entire strategy, my family's future, everything was already lost. My mind raced, weighing probabilities, searching for an alternative, but there was none. The die was cast, the trap was set. Now I could only wait for the jaws to snap shut, and pray I hadn't merely walked into another, more cunning snare. They had stripped me bare, not just of my access and my title, but of the very framework that held me. Yet in that stark nakedness, a new resolve had hardened within me, sharp as a freshly honed blade. Tonight the numbers would speak, not in hushed conference rooms, but under the vast, indifferent sky. The damp air of the yacht marina after midnight clung to me, a cold shroud. The scent of salt and diesel fuel, usually a nostalgic balm from childhood trips, now carried an edge of something metallic, like the taste of fear. My breath plumed briefly in the weak glow of a distant navigation light, a ghost of my internal tremor. But my mind, even stripped of its corporate armor, still saw patterns in the chaos. The syndicate, with its penchant for meticulous misdirection, always left a breadcrumb, a subtle deviation from the norm that only a mind trained in anomalies would perceive. The hum of a specific generator, a flicker of light from a cabin window that shouldn't have been occupied so late, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of expensive cigar smoke carried on the breeze. My internal compass, honed by years of sifting through financial deception, pointed not to the marked slip. All I had left were hunches and a desperate need for truth. Its name, etched in elegant script, was obscured by the gloom, but I didn't need it. I knew its purpose. As I stepped onto the gangplank, the wood groaned beneath my weight, a protest in the stillness. The faint scent of cigar smoke grew stronger, mingling now with the aroma of aged whiskey. I pushed open the cabin door, unlatched but heavy, and stepped into a space that shimmered with subdued light and the palpable tension of waiting. Thomas, the voice of the senior partner, smooth as polished granite, cut through the quiet. He sat at a polished mahogany table, a half-empty glass in his hand, his eyes glinting. Across from him, the director, a woman whose composure was usually unflappable, watched me with an unnerving stillness. The hulking figure of the enforcer stood near the door to the deck, a silent sentinel, his presence a lead weight in the air. "Gentlemen," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, "and madam, a charming venue for a clandestine board meeting." My gaze swept over them, a challenge. "I believe we have some outstanding business." The senior partner chuckled, a low, dry sound. "Business, Thomas. You're a ghost, a dismissed employee, a loose end. You have no business here." "I have the numbers," I countered, pulling a small, encrypted drive from my jacket pocket. It felt impossibly light, yet held the weight of everything. Every transaction, every shell corporation, every laundered penny. From the initial offshore transfers to the final, legitimate-looking investments, the ghost in your machine. The director's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. Our systems are impenetrable." "Are they?" I held up the drive. "This contains a complete mirror of your hidden ledger, accessible through a backdoor you thought only your chief programmer knew about. I found it in the anomalies of the public ledgers, the discrepancies too small for anyone else to notice, but too consistent to be accidental. Your impenetrable system had a tell, like a nervous gambler." I paused, letting that sink in. And I've already initiated a timed release. If I don't confirm my safety within the next hour, it goes to every relevant authority, every journalist I could trust. We can still make this disappear. You can try, I responded, my voice hardening. But the data is out there, waiting for a signal. And I'm not the only one who knows it exists. I've left a trail of breadcrumbs just like you did, for others to follow. I watched the senior partner's face, searching for a crack. You thought the wrong slip number would throw me off, but it confirmed my suspicions. Your pattern of subtle misdirection is as consistent as your pattern of illicit funds. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or a grudging respect, crossed the senior partner's face before it vanished. You truly think you can outwit us? I don't need to outwit you, I replied. I just need to expose you. You structured your network like a perfectly balanced scales, Thomas, but you forgot one crucial detail, he added, tapping a finger on the table. The offshore accounts, they all funnel into a single, untraceable entity. You never found that. My heart gave a lurch. Had I missed something? I had meticulously traced the money, following the digital breadcrumbs across borders and through layers of shell companies. But a single, untraceable entity. No, that didn't add up. My analysis showed a distributed network, designed to avoid exactly that kind of single point of failure. Had they created another layer since my last data capture? A moment of doubt, sharp and sudden, pierced my resolve. Had I been so focused on the trees that I missed the forest? There was this all for nothing. No, I countered, my voice regaining its steel. Your network appears distributed, but the common thread is the payment processor. A specific, proprietary algorithm used for every transfer, a digital signature unique to your operation. I didn't need to find a single entity, I found the single method. And that method, when cross-referenced with your public filings, creates a fingerprint impossible to deny. The senior partner's jaw tightened. My words had clearly struck home. You overplayed your hand, Thomas, he snarled, pushing back his chair. Your little drive means nothing if no one ever sees it. As he moved, the enforcer lunged. My reflexes, sharpened by weeks of paranoia, were just fast enough. I sidestepped, the air rushing past my ear as his massive hands swept where my head had been. I didn't have time for elegance. I needed to survive. My only objective was to protect the drive, to ensure the signal went out. I scrambled backward, knocking over a delicate side table, sending a crystal decanter crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The clock is ticking, I yelled, my voice hoarse, fumbling with my phone in my pocket. One final confirmation, one last push. The enforcer was on me again, a relentless wave of muscle. He grabbed my arm, twisting it, trying to pin me. Pain shot up my shoulder, but I held onto the drive, clutching it like a lifeline. I kicked out, connecting with his shin, earning a grunt of surprise. It bought me a precious second. I saw the senior partner reaching for a satellite phone on the table, likely to try and shut down the transmission. Too late, I gasped, my fingers flying across the screen of my phone. The yacht, once a sanctuary for their secrets, now felt like a cage, shrinking around them. A small, almost imperceptible green light flashed on the drive in my hand, signifying success. A primal roar escaped the enforcer's lips as he tackled me, sending us both crashing to the polished floor. The impact jarred my teeth, but a grim satisfaction settled in my chest. It was done. The data was out. The clock had run out for them. The senior partner froze, his hand still hovering over the satellite phone, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The director's composure finally fractured, her eyes wide with sudden horror. I lay there, bruised and winded, the drive still clutched tightly in my hand, watching their world, meticulously constructed on lies and deceit, begin its spectacular, irreversible collapse. The enforcer's momentum, a dark tide of brute force, carried him past me. I felt the ripple of disturbed air, a ghost caress against my cheek, as his massive fist sliced through the space where my skull had been. My own movement was a desperate, ugly thing, a scramble born of pure, unthinking survival. My foot found purchase on the slick wooden planking of the dock, my body twisting, clumsy and off balance. The precious drive, nestled against my chest beneath my jacket, felt like a throbbing heart, fragile and vital. He spun, a low growl rumbling in his throat, eyes like obsidian chips reflecting the distant, blurred lights of the yacht marina after midnight. Wrong slip number. He was a predator, accustomed to easy prey. I was not easy. Not anymore. The weeks of looking over my shoulder, the nights spent poring over encrypted ledgers, had honed something primal within me. It wasn't courage, not truly, but a desperate refusal to yield. I heard the distant thrum of an engine, a faint siren's wail bleeding into the humid night air. Hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, sparked. Had the detective truly believed me? Had the coded message, slipped through layers of digital obfuscation, reached the right ears? The enforcer didn't hesitate. He lunged again, a blur of dark fabric and coiled muscle. This time I didn't dodge. I plunged forward, low, aiming for the space between his legs, a desperate, ill-conceived tackle. It was less a strategic move and more an act of sheer, exhausted defiance. My shoulder slammed into his thigh, a jarring impact that sent a jolt up my arm. He grunted, thrown off balance, his foot slipping on the wet wood. For a fraction of a second he teetered, a monstrous statue caught in an impassable pose. That was all I needed. I didn't try to fight him. I merely used his instability, pushing with every ounce of my dwindling strength. He stumbled, a heavy, crashing sound as his body met the cold, dark water of the marina. I scrambled back, gasping, my lungs burning, the taste of salt and fear on my tongue. The drive was still there, a solid comfort. From the Inkai depths, a choked roar emerged, followed by furious splashing. Then the world exploded with light and sound. Blue and red strobes painted the elegant yachts in garish, shifting hues. Tires screeched to a halt. Voices, sharp and authoritative, cut through the night. Police! It was the detective, his face grim, eyes sweeping the scene. I could only nod, my teeth chattering, pointing a trembling finger towards the water. The drive, I rasped, pulling it out, a small black rectangle that held the weight of an empire's secrets. The enforcer, hauled from the water, was subdued, his rage still palpable even in handcuffs. News traveled fast, carried on the invisible currents of the digital age. By dawn, the first reports flickered across screens, vague at first, then sharpening into stark headlines. The firm, once an impenetrable fortress of prestige and power, was crumbling. The intricate web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and falsified ledgers I had painstakingly untangled was laid bare. Arrests began before noon. Not just the anonymous enforcer from the darks, but figures I had seen daily, men and women who had smiled across conference tables, their eyes holding secrets I was only now fully comprehending. A senior partner, his face a mask of disbelief, followed. Even the administrative manager, who had always seemed so innocuous, was taken in, a small detail I'd noted in a peripheral ledger now proving her complicity. My name, once synonymous with meticulous, quiet accounting, was now emblazoned across every news outlet, often alongside unflattering photos of the firm's shattered facade. Cleared. That was the word they used. Thomas was cleared. A whistleblower, a hero, some called me. I felt no heroism, only a profound, aching emptiness. The detective, a man whose face was etched with the silent stories of countless investigations, sat opposite me in a sterile interview room a day later. The syndicate, he answered, his voice flat. It's deeper than we initially thought, Thomas. My drive. It's a blueprint, but the roots go further than just the firm. I listened, my gaze fixed on the grainy image projected onto a wall screen, a complex organizational chart, far more extensive than anything I had pieced together. Now we're tracing the veins, the capillaries, and what we're finding. I had focused so intently on the numbers, the money, the tangible evidence. But the faces on the news, the quiet arrests of officials in seemingly unrelated sectors, a port authority manager, a customs agent, a regional logistics coordinator, these were the weight that doesn't add up moments I hadn't yet fully processed. My data had implicated them, but I hadn't connected the dots to their specific roles. The syndicate wasn't just a criminal enterprise using a firm. It was a parasitic entity embedded within the very mechanisms of society. The reveal was not just the scale of the money laundering, but the terrifying breadth of its human network, woven into the fabric of everyday institutions. My initial relief, a fleeting balm, began to recede, replaced by a lingering unease. I had stopped the bleeding at the firm, but the cancer I now understood was systemic. My life, my career, my family, they were safe for now. But the world I had once known, a world of predictable ledgers and quantifiable risks, was gone. Could I ever truly be free of it? The question hung in the air, a silent, heavy weight. The cool, salt wind, a whisper of brine and distant engines, caressed my face as I stood at the edge of the yacht marina after midnight, wrong slip number. The rhythmic clanking of halyards against masts, a metallic lullaby, was the only sound besides the gentle slap of water against hulls. My gaze drifted across the dark, polished surfaces of the moored vessels, each a silent sentinel to unseen voyages. I wasn't meant to be here, not truly. This wasn't my assigned spot, nor was it a place I frequented in my former life. My mind, an accountant's ledger forever tallying, still sifted through the recent past. The faces on the news, no longer abstract figures in a spreadsheet but flesh and blood individuals, had been stark reminders of the intricate web I'd helped unravel. Their quiet arrests, cascade of dominoes falling across the globe, confirmed the magnitude of the beast we had cornered. A figure emerged from the gloom between two towering masts, their silhouette a familiar shape against the faint glow of the city lights across the bay. No words were exchanged, only a slight inclination of the head from the detective. He handed me a small, sealed envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, crisp and official, detailed the final disposition of the recovered funds, a staggering sum that would now, hopefully, serve justice rather than corrupt it. The tension, though, lingered like the scent of ozone after a storm. It wasn't the immediate fear of pursuit, but the quiet hum of a world irrevocably altered, a sense that vigilance was no longer a choice, but a permanent state. The detective's eyes, even in the dim light, held a knowing weariness that mirrored my own. I drove home slowly, the city a blur of streetlights and muted hum. The front door creaked open, a familiar sound that now carried the weight of sanctuary. My wife met me in the hallway, her sleep-softened eyes searching mine. No need for words. A shared glance, a silent affirmation of survival, of enduring. I could feel the faint, steady beat of her heart, a rhythm that had once been threatened, now resolute. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, painting the familiar space in hues of gold. My son, oblivious to the deeper currents that had recently churned our lives, devoured his cereal with the joyful abandon of youth. My wife watched him, a tender smile gracing his lips, then turned to me. "What now, Thomas?" he asked, his voice soft but firm, ready for whatever answer I might give. The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and the ghost of what was lost. My old life, that meticulous dance with numbers, the sterile comfort of spreadsheets and ledgers, felt impossibly distant, a relic from another era. The thought of returning to the corporate labyrinth, even one untainted by corruption, felt like a betrayal of the truth I had fought so hard to uncover. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the aroma a grounding presence. My hands, once accustomed to the precise tap of a keyboard, now felt stronger, more capable of grappling with something tangible. The meticulousness remained, but it was now tempered by a sharpened instinct, willingness to look beyond the surface. The thrill of the chase, the intellectual puzzle of the fraud, had been replaced by a deeper, more profound understanding of its human cost. "I can't go back," I responded, the words a quiet declaration. "Not to that." My wife nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She knew. He had seen the transformation, the fear and the courage that had forged a new path for me. My gaze drifted to the local newspaper lying on the counter, a headline about community projects catching my eye. There was a need, a clear, undeniable need, for the skills I possessed, but applied in a different context. To protect, to build, to ensure transparency in places where it mattered most, away from the glittering facades of corporate power. Public service, perhaps, or a smaller, more ethical firm, dedicated to safeguarding the vulnerable from the very schemes I had dismantled. The idea, once an alien concept, now felt like a natural progression, a quiet calling. The world outside our window was still the same, yet profoundly different. The trees still swayed with the breeze, the birds still sang their morning chorus. It wouldn't be easy. The journey ahead would be fraught with its own challenges, its own subtle tensions. The scars would remain, a testament to the battles fought. But as I looked at my son, his face bright with innocent joy, and then at my wife, her hand reaching for mine across the table, I felt a cautious optimism bloom within my chest. A new horizon indeed. Not a pristine, untouched landscape, but one shaped by the storms, stronger for having weathered them. We would build something new together on this altered ground.